All right, so welcome along today to our writing circle on coherence. My name's Kerry. If you haven't met me before, thank you for coming along today. And just to begin, I would like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders' laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning, and QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay, so as I said, welcome along everybody. Thank you for coming. The slides are already up on Blackboard. I've just popped the link into the chat for you. The recording maybe this afternoon, but most likely early in the morning, and you will receive an email with all of the links. It's actually that same link once I get the recording up. So today is a writing circle, so interactive with exemplars, practical activities, checking your own writing. Now, this session actually follows on for one that we did a couple of weeks ago now, I think it was, on engaging your reader. I'm just going to pop the link into the chat because it's a slightly different link to the one where the resources for today are. So, you know, you could go in and check out those resources if you wanted to. And if you do want to know more after today, we've just got a couple more sessions left for the semester: writing your conclusion, writer's block, writing up your thesis, and a proofreading writing circle. So please come along to those if you can, if they're relevant for you. So today what we're looking at is organizing, connecting, and synthesizing your ideas and arguments to engage the reader and to make the value of your research explicit and clear. So writing sections and chapters that flow logically. I'll be looking at some strategies around those things. So quite a busy session. Hoping to get to our exemplar by about 11:20, so that we still also have time for the Q&A, of course. So just a couple of questions to get you thinking. Are you a big picture thinker or are you more detail oriented? Have a think about that, because we will come back to these questions. Try to jot something down. In terms of the big picture of your research, also think of and write down 2 contributions that you hope your research will make to your field of study. So you should have an idea of this no matter where you exactly are in your candidature. Just jot down a couple of dot points. And as I said, we will come back to these. Pop them into the chat. All right, so yeah, just jot down a couple of contributions that you're thinking your research will make, and we will come back. I'll give you a minute. All right, so lots of activities today. You would have received a UniHub reminder email. Make sure you check these out when they do come through. So the preparation for today was to bring along a draft section of your writing. Now, for the activities to work the best, if you can have 3 or more consecutive paragraphs from a section would be fabulous. So if you haven't got that ready, just duck into your files and grab something. It's for your own use, the draft. You won't share it. Probably do a save as, because you'll be writing some notes in there. And of course, we'll also be examining exemplars as we go through the session. Oh, and I just want to say with these activities, we don't have hours and hours of time. So I don't give you a huge amount of time to do each of the activities, but you can always go back. You have the materials, you have everything you need. So please don't worry if I move on a bit quicker than you would have hoped, because I would encourage you to go back and keep on working on those activities. And also with our exemplars, I always choose exemplars that are well written, okay? I will never give you one that's a trick or that the writing isn't where it needs to be. But of course, you'll be reading them to check for the readability and what you think about the quality. And I always choose exemplars that we can all have a very basic understanding of, even though they're not always going to be exactly your field of study, which is very difficult for me to do. I do try to have a range, and also to make it where we can envisage and imagine the research setting a little bit, you know. So rather than something that's really difficult for us to understand, I wouldn't use those sorts of exemplars. All right, let's have a look at some key principles. Now, as I said, we did have an Engaging Your Reader workshop, so there is a little bit of repetition today, but different examples. All right, so what exactly is coherence? So these are dictionary definitions, just to show you that, you know, trying to keep coherence with the synonyms is trying to make it a little bit less daunting, I suppose. So coherence is about being logical and consistent, and that really important aspect there of the unified whole. You've got a really big document, whether it's your proposal or your final thesis, it's still quite a big document. So some synonyms there: sticking together, linking, interrelatedness. So all the sections, all the chapters need to be interrelated. And who are we being coherent for? Of course, the reader. You will know that this is my key message the whole time with all of our sessions, is it's always about the reader. So we need to get into the reader's shoes, and that's part of the practice of the modeling of the examples, and also, of course, the exemplars. All right. So when we talk about academic writing, or for us, research writing is more specific, we need those clear connections with the main points in the sections, the chapters, the whole document. So organized and connected, and thinking about your research problem, and then you're going to answer some research questions. You've got research aims. And within all of that, coherence is the two key strategies are synthesizing and critical analysis. So we'll delve into those a little bit later. But again, as I said, who's this coherence for? It's for the reader. Why is it important? Because you've got a big document, all right? We've got to lead the reader through. You're telling a narrative. You have a story with a beginning and an ending. So without coherence, what happens is your meaning gets lost, your persuasion, the value of the research gets lost as well, and you'll find it hard to engage a reader. So think of the coherence as the whole document, the whole of each chapter, and then each section within each chapter. So coherence is what we call the macro level of the document. As we just said, the sections, the chapters, the whole document. Now linked to that, of course, is the cohesion, which is the micro level. So your micro level are the paragraphs, and within the paragraphs, the vocabulary, the grammar, the sentence structure, clear topic sentences, and using transition signals. So you can see coherence and cohesion overlap at the paragraph level, because your paragraphs, of course, make up your sections. So when I'm talking about coherence or macro level, I don't mean the wording in each paragraph or how each paragraph flows. That's cohesion, all right? But of course, they both overlap. So to be cohesive within each paragraph means you have one clear main point, the grammar's correct, the vocabulary is appropriate, topic sentence is appropriate, and the transition signals are there. To be coherent is that those main points in each paragraph connect to other main points in the section, and that your chapters connect because you're leading the reader all the way through your story, and then the whole document is coherent in that the ideas, the arguments are all the same all the way through, and you're building and building. Now, we actually have a writing circle on cohesion, which I'm sure many of you have attended. That one's with Tash. I'm just going to pop the resources are in Blackboard for that one. You can go and check those out. So then, remember that question just at the beginning there? Are you a big picture thinker or are you more detail orientated? I asked you that because you need to be both. Okay, being detail oriented is about the cohesion, the paragraph level, of course, plus your referencing style and all of those sorts of things, like making sure that your punctuation is correct and your spelling. But you also need to be a big picture thinker too, of course, because that's what we're talking about today is the coherence. So you need to be both. So if you're more of the big picture person and the step back, you need to also get good at that finer detail as well, and vice versa. If you're more detail orientated, you also need to remember to step back and look at the coherence as well. So we mainly focus today on that, that macro level, the big picture, but we do a little bit of micro level as well, because we're going to look at things like vocabulary, using strong vocabulary. So keeping the big picture in mind is sometimes something we forget because we're really, focused on a particular section, and we're making sure the paragraphs are really clear and that our sentences make sense. But we must remember to envisage the whole research project as well. So try to, make some time for that, for stepping back and looking at the big picture and thinking about your planning of how you're going to structure and write the entire research project up from beginning to the end as soon as you can, even if you're in the planning stage. Sometimes you might receive feedback where they're saying the clarity's not there, the structure might need to be revised, or the information isn't quite clear exactly why you're telling us this information. So that's the sort of time when you need to step back and problem solve and really look at the coherence there, and making sure that you're providing the reader with all of the clear connections within the sections, within the chapters, and within the whole document. So if we think about planning from the beginning, one of the best ways I can advise is to figure out how many words or pages. I find words easier. So how many words you're envisaging for each chapter, and exactly what chapters are you having. I know some of you have a couple of lit review chapters because you might talk about your theoretical framework. How are you going to present your results and your discussion? So if you sort of have from the beginning, a bit of a plan, remembering it is going to change and that's okay. So an example of a PhD, if we say, okay, we're aiming for around 80,000 words or potentially more, is it 8 chapters and 10,000 words? No, not generally. Your intro and conclusion would be less, and the other chapters would be much longer. And of course, if you've got a proposal and you have to write 3,000 words, okay, how are you going to adjust each of those sections? They wouldn't be 1,000 words each, assuming that you have an introduction, a little brief lit review, and something on your research design. Potentially, of course, your introduction would be a lot less than 1,000 words, wouldn't it, to give you room to really expand in the lit review. Same with the research article. Again, best way is your target journal. Have a look at how much they put into each of the sections for the articles that have already been published in that journal. So try to plan from the very beginning. So that draft plan, really also be thinking about, as I said, how you're going to present your findings and the discussion, because this is going to be the key. This is what the reader is waiting for. You're setting them up in those first few chapters, introduction, lit review, methodology, if that's the way you're going. So have a plan. It's probably going to change, but that's okay. At least you have a starting point, because to keep the reader engaged, we can't have 20 pages of results without something more in there. All right, so that might mean you need a couple of chapters for your results, or it might mean that you need to put some of your raw results into an appendix. Okay, so there's lots of things to be thinking about. We do have 2 writing circles on writing your results and writing your discussion. They're in that link that I just gave you where the cohesion and today's are as well. So that might help you as well as part of your planning if you go in and have a look at those resources. So as we said, you're going to make a draft plan, but we also have to be open to changing. Things are going to change. So my advice again, make a plan, try not to agonize, make some informed decisions based on, you know, discussions you've already had with your supervisors or based on examples that you've read of another thesis. Make a decision. But my advice would also be, write a few notes to explain why you were thinking you might do it this way, why the big picture might look like this, because you'll probably forget, you know, you'll come back to revise at some point and go, I'm not sure why this is this way, but you would have had a reason. So leave yourself really, really good notes. So future self can say, oh, okay, I see what I was thinking, but actually now I have a better idea. And of course, seek feedback. That's also, so it's all about the reader, which is why we've got to seek feedback, right? Now, the other thing that's really important for that idea of the coherence, the big picture, the macro level of the document is that common thread. It needs to go all the way through. And the common thread will be what makes your study valuable, significant, and worthwhile? What are your aims? What is your research problem? So be very clear in your own mind what those things are. And then, of course, make sure you remind the reader over and over and over again. Okay. Always we're starting with a research problem, because if there's no problem, why do we need your research? So there's a little activity there. See if you can write in the chat the research problem that you're investigating. Try and do it in 1 sentence if you can. So to get you started, I'm going to pop mine in the chat. So for me, it's about the fact that developing effective writing practices for HDRs can be quite challenging. It can take time. So what are the best strategies to support HDRs to practice their writing skills and improve their writing skills? So if you want to pop into the chat what your research problem is, that would be great. Thank you. All right, hopefully some more people will put some in as we continue on, because as I said, this is your starting point, okay? And that research problem, you need to convince and persuade the reader that this is a problem that's urgent and we need insight into, and oh, surprise, surprise, you're the one to give us this insight. In the chat, marginalization of persons with disabilities in HIV programs, nice. So how to fix that, I guess, address it. How does moral legitimacy influence speeding behavior? That's an interesting, I'm assuming you mean speeding in a car. Exploring pre-service teachers practice practicum for speakers of other languages, I think that is. Yes, it is speeding in cars. Good, good. All right, let's move on, but thank you for sharing. All right, as you know better than anyone, writing a thesis, it's a long process. Now remember too, everything I'm talking about thesis by publication as well as monograph. Exogenous, maybe not as much because they're slightly different, but either way, any of those 3, you are still having to put a big document together. All right, that needs to be coherent. All right, so because of this long process, you can't focus on everything straight away. So keep on remembering to take that time to step back and look at the big picture, stay on top of the coherence of the sections and the chapters. I know you've got a work in progress, but we do need to go backwards and forwards, plan and revise regularly. If you do that, if you stay on top and seek feedback, there'll be less stress and anxiety, which is really something that I'm keen for you to have is less stress and anxiety and more confidence in your abilities to get this thesis written. So you will have to redraft many times, and that's okay. You might not feel like it's okay at the time, but it's what's required to get your thesis to the quality that you want. So you really need the words on the page first. Now, even though I'm saying, oh, step back and look at the big picture, there's no big picture until you get those messy drafts done, and then revise, seek feedback, tidy them up. Okay, so you need those words on the page first, of course, but then once you've got those words on the page and a lot of words, at least a section, then you can look at the big picture. So when you're macro proofreading, which means looking at the coherence, looking at the big picture, have you got the common thread in every section? Is there a logical flow? Is the value of the research clear? Are you persuading the reader about this research problem and that it's important? So as part of that idea of macro proofreading and looking at the big picture, make sure you put into your schedule opportunities and times, specific times for you to do that, which will be separate to those messy drafts and separate to getting the words on the page and proofreading the micro level, the paragraph level. So it could be, depending on where you're up to in your candidature, but certainly once you're nearly ready to get when you're getting closer to a milestone or submitting something to your supervisors, you must do some big picture proofreading. So as I will always remind you, QUT has a thesis repository. You can see there, you can tick which thesis format works for you. So that's QUT ePrints. You just put that into the website for QUT and it'll come up. So if you've never gone in there, I recommend that you do. And really, really quickly, long document formatting, it is something that we sometimes leave to the last minute. I recommend not to do that. If you haven't looked at this before, do it as soon as you can. It does take time. And I would really strongly recommend that you always submit documents to your supervisors that are formatted in that long document way. So it's all about how the document is formatted. The setup of the pages, the headings, subheadings, margins, page breaks, making sure everything's consistent and correct. So try not to end up like this lady in the image. So there is information on HiQ. I'll give you the link. All right. Anyone have any tips or resources about this long Word document formatting? There's a few resources there. Sometimes YouTube videos are really helpful. So it's a long Word document. All right. So if anyone has any tips, pop them in the chat. And also, hopefully this is something you're already doing, is this version control to make sure you don't lose anything, make sure you back up every day in multiple places. You don't have to delete, just start a new version or a new draft. Maybe you do it by numbering, maybe by dates. Make sure you have lots of folders and USBs, and email stuff to yourself is another really good way. Yep, so tips about formatting is do it from the beginning, paste from other documents using plain text, look at past students' thesis under your supervisor. Yep, good tip. Yeah. Lots of books about research writing that are useful. Here's just a few. Make friends with the library staff. You have a librarian attached to your faculty. So talk to them. They will always be lovely and helpful. I know for a fact. Think Well is a really good resource. They have a lot of guides and planners that will help you with this idea of your big picture. Also in the chat, make bullet points for all the input you need to talk about in the document and try to cover the bullet points one by one. Yep, that's a good way for planning. Thank you. A lot of these books are ebooks as well, so that's handy. Now, two more excellent resources. We watched a little bit of this YouTube video in the Engaging Your Reader workshop. It is very good. And also, of course, The Craft of Research, the book there, it's really good too. It's 2008, but still very, very applicable for us. Okay, so that was a quick overview of the main principles there. Let's get into some more nitty-gritty. How are you achieving coherence? These are the strategies that we're going to look at right now. All right, keep your eye on the big picture. We already touched on this. So important. Just schedule the time in, all right, to do that. Keep clear notes, as we said before. Anyone know of any mind map tools or resources to use to maybe keep your eye on that big picture? There's an image of a mind map there, central topics, some subtopics. Anybody else have any tools that you think are good for this, for mind mapping? In the chat, a really good strategy when receiving feedback, I recommend to correct and rewrite in your original file. Yep, so that's all about your version control, because especially if you're getting feedback from multiple supervisors too, it can get a little bit unwieldy. So really set up a good system so that you're not lost, okay? And then it's very easy to go back and check feedback if you need to. So keep your eye on the big picture. Schedule big picture planning time. So we're going to look at a couple of strategies around this that you might like to use. So we're going to look at drafting, writing and drafting a synopsis. It's like a short abstract. Another thing you can do is print your tables of contents for each section and each chapter. Once you've got the table of contents there, next to every subheading, write a sentence and explain what the main point is. And then you can check and make sure you are scaffolding the reader and leading the reader through in a clear way. Also, another strategy is constructing a reverse outline, and we're going to look at that in a minute. So a research synopsis, it's just like a one page, or you can do more, but it's a really good way to keep your supervisory team updated without sending them a huge, massive document. You're basically summarizing your main points, and then you can get feedback on whether you're on the right track. You can be as detailed as you like. And my advice would be to keep updating it as you go through your stages of your research. So for example, if you're at the beginning of your candidature, or even if you're not, you could do a synopsis that talks about the research problem, the research gaps, the research aims, and the potential contribution to knowledge. We're going to look at one in a second. All right, so that activity sheet has today's exemplars. We've got two. One's a qualitative research proposal from health. One's a stage 2 document in the physics field. So what we're going to do is have a look at what a synopsis might look like. But first of all, we're going to read through exemplar 1 and then use it to construct an example synopsis of those research problem and gaps, aims, and the contribution to knowledge. So as we're reading through, we're going to read through together in a second. I want you to look at all those aspects of writing, okay? The critical voice, the synthesis, the transition signals to lead through, and see if you think that they're being used effectively. All right, so this is our exemplar 1. It's a research proposal. I've adapted it and manipulated a little bit. And all right, so the construction of pain within a surgical world. Now, don't forget what we're looking at is the problem and gaps and the aims, and then the research contribution as well. So I'll put we'll read through and I'll highlight some of the sentences and we'll see how we would construct our synopsis. Okay. Now, this is the very beginning of the research proposal as well. So what's going to be important here is that the reader is all set up. We're the readers, remember, we need to be all set up and have a really good understanding of what's happening in this research. So see what you think if they've achieved that. All right. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. All right, pain management is an aspect of postoperative care which is or is perceived as being poorly managed by healthcare professionals. So I'm just gonna, what's happened to my highlighting? Yeah, okay. This is despite a view heralded within the literature that advances in the understanding of pain mechanisms, the action of drugs, and the development of sophisticated systems for drug delivery mean it is no longer necessary for the surgical patient to suffer from unrelieved pain post-surgery. Okay, so that's good. So pain management is important, but it's being poorly managed, even though we have all this good research and effective strategies in the field. Unrelieved pain has personal, social, and economic costs. For example, the experience of unrelieved pain has been linked to the surgical patient experiencing complications, increasing the length of stay, which ultimately requires additional resources. Okay, and I'm going to highlight this one. While the experience of unrelieved pain has been recognised as an undesirable occurrence, the provision of appropriate pain management remains a contentious issue. Okay, so pretty clear about the problem, aren't we? I would say yes. This study is based on the belief that a certain way of thinking and speaking about pain dominates the management of a surgical patient's potential or actual experience at the exclusion of other ways of thinking and speaking. Okay, so the certain way of thinking and speaking, we know that they're talking about the health professionals, right? But that may not be how the surgical patient is thinking and speaking. So the potential or actual experience of pain has become a means through which dominant knowledge sources and power relations are maintained and produced. Okay, so who's got the power in this situation that we're talking about? Who do you think? Is it clear? The notion of discourse and the way in which it shapes the form and content of language, both written and spoken, has been extensively explored by Foucault. His analyses of discursive frameworks provide an understanding of the interplay between power, knowledge, and discourses. Pain and its management have become discursively constructed, and the positioning adopted by health professionals in relation to their discourses need to be identified if effective pain management from a patient-centered approach is to be a reality of practice. So who's got the power in this situation? Who are they saying has the power? It's not the patients, is it? Should it be the patients? It should. That's the problem, right? Thus, this study aims to explore and explicate the way in which pain is constructed within a surgical ward and the effects of this construction on nursing practice and the influences on patient outcomes. So there's our aim. We were looking for the aim, weren't we, as well? Yeah. Acute pain management for surgical patients involves medical and nursing personnel who share both responsibility for the quality of care and the financial costs involved in the delivery. As a consequence of this shared responsibility, there is potential for divergence of opinion. Okay, interesting. Is that a problem? Probably. It'll influence patient outcomes and affect nursing practice. It is unknown how nurses and doctors conceive the work of patients in acute pain management more problem. These people have argued the pain management takes place within an organizational and interactional context, and medical and nursing care involves politicized action. As a result, they believed a critical examination in routine situations was necessary to improve accountability. However, it is significant to note that they did not specifically address the influence of power relations. We've got that again, interesting, on pain management. Rather, they focused on personal pain philosophies of nurses and doctors. Thus, this study seeks to build upon the research by applying a post-structuralist framework to acute pain management for the surgical patient. The interest of this study is to explore the social construction of pain by major care providers in an acute post-operative ward. All right. Okay, so what are you thinking? Anything? Do you feel, so subheading, post, purpose and background, clear? Is there a clear problem? Do you feel like you can understand their research problem? You might not be persuaded yet. That's okay. We're only 3 paragraphs in, but I really want you to be understanding, of course, that there's a problem and understanding the aims. Now, the other thing we were looking at was the contribution, weren't we? Anything that you can see that might be alluding towards a contribution? Well, they've said they want to extend on these other people. Where was that? Yep, they want to extend on them. Stakeholders, nurses and doctors, patients, the hospitals themselves, because it's going to cost money, patient outcomes. So there's a lot of things going on, but I feel like that it's a really nice setup for us in these first few paragraphs. Yeah, from the perspective of the patients, yeah, and also that what they're actually, so that when they say here, these people looked at the philosophy, the pain philosophies, which is good. That's a starting point, isn't it? So then to extend, they're actually going to look at the discourse. So how do they talk about it to each other and to the patients? I don't know if you have ever been a patient in a hospital. I dare say a lot of you would have. So we can envisage being that patient in the hospital, can't we? They come in, how's your pain? How do we talk about that? And there would be many, many instances where a patient is saying, my pain is really high, or my pain is quite low. So how does that discussion go? And then, of course, depending on what you say to the health professional will depend on how much pain relief you get, isn't it? So, and remember, they're also looking at the power relationships. And what did we ascertain? The patient doesn't necessarily have the power. Maybe they do. Does it depend on the philosophy and understanding of the health professional? Most likely. So we can understand the setup. All right, let's go back to our slides. All right, so we've read through. Let's have a look. So this could be an example of a synopsis. Now, those numbers in the brackets are the sentence numbers, okay? And obviously you wouldn't put that in your synopsis, although maybe you will. Maybe if you want your supervisor to check that your sentences are doing what you think or what you want them to do, that's possible as well. So there's quite a lot in those first few paragraphs, isn't it, that are very explicit and leading us to and explaining the problem and the gaps. Okay, so this is what you need. No matter what document you're writing, you need that in these beginning paragraphs. The research aims are there as well, aren't they? Very clear. There was even a sentence that said the aim of this study. I want you to have those sorts of sentences in those beginning paragraphs of your introduction. And then in the other chapters as well, you're going to keep reminding all the way through in every section. So yeah, good setup is what I would say. It's a good exemplar. Now, contribution to knowledge. It's the first 3 chapters. All right, so you wouldn't expect something explicit quite yet. Potentially, maybe you can mention stakeholders and say how you know, that the research aims to do something to help some of your stakeholders do something else. Potentially you might not, or you might have something very explicit in those first few paragraphs, but I would expect in that first section to have something explicit. No, that last slide is not in the handout, sorry, but it is in, remember I gave you the link to Blackboard. So yeah, sorry, it's not. Okay, so from what we read, 3 paragraphs, it's implicit that they want to improve the provision of pain management, right, for patients, to improve the outcomes. One of the ways they alluded to that was saying how it costs money. You know, the patients sometimes have to stay longer, which is bad in itself, let alone the money side of it. And of course, they want to understand how nurses and doctors socially construct pain and talk about it with each other and with the patients as well. So it was a little bit implicit, but we can imagine already, we know who the stakeholders are, we know what they're investigating, and we're starting to understand why as well. So that's what I need from you in those first few paragraphs in your document, whichever it is, proposal, or if it's even the final thesis. So reverse outlining, that is another way to step back and look at the big picture. So usually when we create an outline, it's before we write, isn't it? So this is the reverse of that, where you've already got a section or a chapter, and you're going to examine the structure and the flow. So we're going to look at that together using example 1. I'm just going to go back out of the slides for a second, and then you're going to look at your draft. You can start looking at your draft now if you want to. All right, so let's come down. All right. So reverse outline, it's creating an outline of a text that's already been written. What are we doing that for? Checking the structure and the flow. For your, this is why I sort of said for your draft writing to have at least 3 paragraphs. Now something, when you're doing this activity, this reverse outline, what I recommend that you do, and with any kind of macro proofreading, or when you're stepping back to look at the big picture, don't get drawn into the micro. Don't get drawn into fixing sentences and rearranging what's in the actual paragraph, all right? Because you'll get off topic, you'll get off your task. Remember, you're looking at the big picture here. If you notice that something in a paragraph needs to be fixed, or you've got a weird sounding sentence, or you want to improve something, leave yourself a note and come back later. Otherwise you'll get distracted. So you can do this however what works for you, but this is the process we're going to follow right now. We number the paragraphs, create an outline heading to put the numbers, put them under the headings, identify the main point, and then you examine and check the connections and the flow and reorganize if you need. So you are going to do this with your document. So you can go ahead and start doing that, or just look at what I'm going to do. So I've already numbered my paragraphs, haven't I? So paragraph 1, let's make a reverse outline down here. Whoop, sorry if I'm making you dizzy. Paragraph 1. Paragraph 2. Paragraph 3. Now, this is the beginning of the document, okay? So it's probably one of the more simpler sections, shall we say. You're going to have sections that will be much more complicated and have much more things going on. So probably they're the kinds of sections that you would want to do this reverse outline. This is going to be fairly simple, but as an example, that's probably a good thing. So let's have a look. What's the main point here? In paragraph 1, what are we doing? Or what is the writer doing for us? They're basically setting up the problem, okay? And I feel like we could take this sentence and we could pop it down here for paragraph 1, pain management. And we remember that even though literature says we have effective processes and drugs, okay, still contention, right? So setting up the problem. All right, so then, okay, good, makes sense. What about paragraph 2? What's happening in there? What's the point of this paragraph? Okay, so it's setting up the philosophy, maybe the research design, would you say? So it's talking about power relations, discourse, Foucault. So do you think that this is giving us a little bit of an insight in what the research design is going to be and the underlying, shall we say, perspective of how we are going to look at this problem? I would say yes. So it's not just setting up the aims, but we could pull the aim as the main point. But really, I believe that this is not only setting up the aim and also the probably like the framework or research design. So without having read anything else, we can see where it's leading to us. Yeah, which is really important. Again, not only research problem and aims, I really want you in those first few paragraphs of an introduction, no matter what your document, to begin to say what is going to be the research design. Very broad. This is all very broad, isn't it? And that's the way it's meant to be, definitely. So paragraph 3, and you know, it's still leading us through. Even this is a new paragraph. We are allowed to have a different topic now, okay? But it's still talking about the patients and pain that was all set up in here. So it's not jumping topics. It's still leading us through. So paragraph 3 then, what's it doing? Giving us more information about prior studies and telling us that we don't know. There's something we don't know. So this is really the gap, isn't it? So this one is research gap and more, and also current knowledge, probably we could call it. All right, so if we look at this now, I know, yeah, the mention of Foucault, yeah, Foucault, that's definitely a giveaway that it's about the philosophy and what's underpinning. Yes, absolutely. All right, so remember what we're doing. We're doing a reverse outline. Why? To look at the flow and how the reader is being scaffolded through. So we know that paragraph 1, 2, and 3 are building, okay? Giving us a big, broad idea of what the topic is, letting us in with some more information about why this would be important and the aims and how we might go start to investigate. And then paragraph 3, giving us even more details. Okay, this is what we already know from these previous researchers, but we don't know about how they actually conceive and talk about pain. All right, so I am going to give you a few minutes right now to look at your own document and see if you can pull out those paragraphs and the main points and see what the flow and structure is looking like. All right, we're going to keep going. I know I haven't given you very much time there, but we do need to keep moving. Please go back and keep on doing this activity later. All right, let's keep going with our strategies. Tables and figures, they can be really helpful. Make sure you have a good reason for using them each time. The correct presentation is always you introduce it, you present it, and then discuss below. Make sure you never finish a section with just a table or a figure. There should be writing underneath at all times anyway. And also, of course, because you still need words. All right. And let's have a look at an example. All right. So pop in the chat if you think you know or have any ideas. How would this be beneficial? Like, what is it about this that could be useful? Because I really want you to remember any table or figure, is it useful and exactly why? Okay, any idea? Yep, outlines. Yep, I use this example all the time because it's really hard when you have multiple phases, multiple stages, multiple data collection tools. It's really hard to tell the reader everything at once. This is a really good way, but then we would still also need words, of course, to explain it. Yeah, it's like a summary. Another example, so this is good. It's giving us the exact research setting. What I want you to notice here is how it is introduced and how the label, figure 3.1 is in bold. This is for APA 7, and then the label is italicized and capitalized, but no full stop. And then there's an explanation underneath that talks about exactly what they want the reader to get from it. So of course, subheadings, I talk about subheadings all the time because they communicate key ideas and lead the reader through, and they shed light on the entire project. So try not to be vague when you have your subheadings. Avoid a subheading that's introduction or conclusion because you will most likely have a chapter for those. So you don't want to confuse the reader. Here's an example of a table of contents. Right. Can you tell the research topic just by looking at that table of contents? And do you notice any common threads? What's the research topic? No tips about the topic? Nursing? Yep. Nursing for who? Yep. Vulnerable families. Now, we don't know what that means yet, but we will if we were to read the thesis, of course. So thesis title, Determined to Make a Difference, a study of public health nursing practice with vulnerable families. Yep, so we had that in the table of contents. All right, so another thing about your subheadings, I talk about this a lot as well, that first sentence has to acknowledge the subheading. Here's an example. Subheading is academic reading. And look at the first words of the first sentence. Academic reading has a significant role in literacy and learning at university, blah, blah, blah. Okay. What about if we didn't have that as the first sentence and this was the first sentence? To date, the field of academic literacy research has primarily focused on writing practices. Doesn't say anything about reading, does it? So this was a second sentence of that after that subheading. Why have I shown you this? Because I see this issue all the time. I'll see the subheading and the first sentence says nothing about that. It might go into a tiny detail, or it might talk about some other aspect of that. You can't do that. That first sentence, it needs to match your subheading. Otherwise, you lose the reader from the very beginning. So have a quick check of your own document. All right, now we're going to get into synthesis and critical analysis. So write in the chat which chapters you think that synthesis would be absolutely essential. So synthesis is bringing individual ideas together, right? Comparing and checking to see if there's differences, what's the same. And critical analysis is pulling apart, all right? Synthesis is bringing together, critical analysis is then pulling apart, but then putting back together in a clear way to put forward your critical voice. So where are we going to have synthesis? It would be everywhere, of course, but most definitely in your lit review and your discussion, because of course your lit review, you're combining multiple sources and ideas. You need to make judgments. What's different? What's similar? Are there patterns? You need a holistic insight of the field as a whole, as well as those individual studies. And of course, in the discussion, the added bonus is your empirical evidence. Common feedback lacks synthesis. So we need to have that. We want to avoid that. We'll have a look at that in a second. How do we avoid that feedback of lack synthesis? Don't have paragraphs after paragraphs that are summary after summary. Okay, you need to merge them together. This study said something, another study said something that was similar, which means that they're saying, you know, that we're clear about that knowledge. However, there's someone else that says something else, which brings in a contention. So rather than just saying someone said, someone said, someone said, we need your voice in there as well. And try not to have, I don't want to have you to have a paragraph that has the same source cited over and over. Make sure you have more than one source. And also we don't want any paragraphs that it's just citation after citation. Your voice needs to be in there as well. You need to refer initially to the literature as the whole and then set the scene. It demonstrates your deep understanding, and then you bring in the individual studies and analyze those. So we're going to look at an example of synthesis, back an example 1 that you have in your handout. So paragraph 1, what you're looking for, are they effective in their synthesis? And also have a look at the APA referencing as well. So here it is. So write in the chat, do you think this is effective, how they've synthesized? I think it's interesting that the first sentence has those citations. I probably wouldn't recommend that. I'd love it for the first sentence of your document to be your voice, and then you have your citations in the sentence after. So they could have a sentence as the first one that just introduced that the topic of pain management is important for, you know, patients as well as the health professionals. And then this sentence could go second. Let's go to the next slide. So if we have a look at where I've highlighted, so see the EG, that's okay. What that's saying is that, for example, here's some of those, the literature, but there's more than these, okay? This is despite a view heralded within the literature, so that's clear. That's saying the literature as a whole. Then they give us an example. And they're telling us that there's contention, which is good. So just regarding APA 7, it's actually correct because you don't put all of the authors even the first time anymore. You just put et al. Yeah, you can use EG for APA 7, that's fine. All right, so critical analysis, you're breaking down, examining, pulling apart, making judgments. What are the conclusions and solutions to solve the research problem? Your evidence will get you there. You need to demonstrate your deep understanding, and you want the reader to achieve a deep understanding. Therefore, you need to tell them what exactly the analysis is, what it means, and be really explicit about your judgments. So descriptive, we still need descriptive writing, of course, it gives the background, but the critical writing transforms into argument solutions. So you need the descriptive, of course, but then we need the critical. What are the consequences of this? Which one is the best option? So the common feedback is lacks critical analysis. We don't want that. We want you to demonstrate your critical analysis. So examine, interpret, make judgments. That's your critical voice, okay? Make your stance clear. Use strong words. Be explicit. This means, this shows, therefore, blah, blah, blah. And you can see some examples there. You must have in all of your sections, in all of your paragraphs, you need these sentences that make the judgments on what you've described. So example 1, again, we're looking at paragraph 3, looking at 2 things, researcher's voice, strong words. Let's have a look. That's the paragraph. Acute pain management involves medical and nursing personnel. There is a potential for divergence of opinion. Yeah, so we already read through that one. Let's have a look. So researcher's voice is in yellow. As a consequence, there is the potential. Okay, so there's a bit of hedging there, which is good. That's fine in that we can't say there's always divergence of opinion because there's not. Strong words there, most appropriately managed. These people have argued. That's a strong reporting verb. Critical examination is needed. So the researcher's voice is all through here, which is really, really important. So it's a good model. All right, so let's have a look at some strategies for clear and logical sections and chapters. So coherence, yep, it's about the research problem, research aim, and the value of the research. So as we said in our example 1, the value is the contribution, and we were beginning to have that alluded for us. It was only the first 3 paragraphs, but somewhere at that, in that, the next sections, they would have articulated exactly the value, right? So the value is, needs to be explicit throughout the thesis. It's persuading the reader. Why do we care? So what? Who cares about if patients are in pain? You know, they've had an operation. Of course we care. Of course we care. And health professionals want to minimize that pain, don't they? So we need to keep the reader informed in every section and chapter about what the value. Keep reminding. Tell your story. You've got a beginning, you've got a middle, you've got an end, you've got your characters there. Be engaging, use those really explicit sentences and your critical voice to engage the reader and lead them through. So those sections, those chapters, they're the stepping stones. You're scaffolding the reader all the way and then keep bringing them back to that common thread. All right, at the beginning of your document, oh, there's this problem. We need to know more. There's gaps in the knowledge. And then you keep on going on and on until we get to the conclusion and say, oh, this empirical evidence has helped to gain insight into this problem. It's achieved the research aims and contributed this valuable knowledge that we needed. And as always, your chapters are connected. Okay, so this is all part of that big picture about the coherence and stepping back. So part of your strategy when you step back to look at the big picture, look at your lit review and methods. Are they connected? Have you started to justify your research design in your lit review? Then your lit review and discussion. Of course they're connected, because your discussion is going to pull that literature that you've already examined and analysed in the lit review chapter. Methods and results, of course they're connected. Remind the reader in the results section how you collected and analysed this data that you're presenting. And of course, the introduction and conclusion, they are mirrors. You're starting the story and then you're ending the story. So remember at the beginning, we said in terms of the big picture, it's about your contributions that you hope your research will make to the field. Remember that this is the value. Those contributions are the value, all right? They're one and the same. So the significance of your study and those contributions, that's the value and the insight that you're going to give to this research problem. So keep reminding the reader all the way through and start alluding to those contributions from those very first paragraphs. So what are you claiming in your document? In your introduction, you're saying, hey, there's a research problem. It's got negative impacts. Hey, there's things we don't know about this problem or these stakeholders or this topic. Then you're going to support that with evidence from the literature. Then you're going to have this justifiable research paradigm and methodology that's ethical, that's robust, that's going to measure and investigate what you want to measure and investigate. And then your empirical evidence will be that value. What you find out is going to help solve the problem and help fill those knowledge gaps. So we don't finally say this in the conclusion, it has to be all the way through. So have a quick look at your document. Is the value of your research explicit and clear in that section that you've got there? Now, if it's in those beginning chapters, maybe the value is about evaluating and recognizing the fact that there's a problem. Maybe the value is about what your aims are going to achieve. So you might not be quite as explicit because you haven't quite got there yet. Depends on what your section is. But there should always be something in every section that brings it back to your so what. Why do we care about this information that you've given us? Oh, because it's background to the research problem. It's stating your aims. It's starting to say why we need this insight into this problem and how your study can give that insight. All right, let's keep going. So another part of that big picture is making sure you keep the reader informed, all right? So informed about what you're doing and why, and justifying and giving all your evidence, but let them know at the start of each section and chapter what's going to happen. What's the aim and function of this section or chapter? How does it fit into your research project? Remind about the research aims or the research questions or hypotheses. Tell them how this information in the section or chapter is going to help to add to that explanation and the evidence, and what can they expect? How is it structured? So for a section, you probably would 2 or 3 sentences might be enough to do this, maybe a paragraph. A chapter, you would need usually at least 1 paragraph to introduce. And then you need to end every section and chapter by giving a recap of the main points by saying, hey, guess what I just showed you? And reiterate and keep persuading and keep being explicit to say this information that I've given you is significant because of these reasons. You should care. I want to persuade you. And remember that these recap paragraphs or these sentences, they're not just a summary where you say, oh, I just told you these things. Why were those things important? How does it add to our knowledge of the whatever section you're in? So if you're in the methodology, how is that given us insight into the research design or whatever part of the research design that you've explained? And how is that part of your research design going to give you the evidence that you need, and how does it link to your aims and your research questions? So it's not just a summary, it's critical analysis and really persuading and being explicit about why this information was important for the reader to know. You will have advanced the argument and advanced their understanding of where you're up to. So again, in a section, maybe just 2 or 3 sentences or even a paragraph. And in a chapter, you would have at least a paragraph, okay? So not a summary, it's a full recap with your critical analysis in there. So we have some more examples and info, as I said, in the workshop that links to this writing circle. I'll pop that into the chat in case you're interested to go and see those materials. All right, and we are now moving on to examine our exemplar. Okay, so welcome back from your breakouts. We'll just finish off before we have our Q&A. So main takeaways for today, it's always about the reader. The activity you just did with the exemplar is you being the reader, so that should be helping you to get into the reader's shoes. And, you know, they really, the reader needs you to lead them through and lay everything out. All right, don't let them put 2 and 2 together because they're likely to get 5. Okay, you need to get them to come around to your interpretation and, you know, your arguments. All right, so make sure you schedule time, of course, to look at the whole document. That's our coherence, it's our big picture, our macro level. Make sure that your sections and your chapters are connecting. So the sections within the chapter should be scaffolding and leading the reader through where you want them to go. And of course, seek feedback. You know, you can ask for specific feedback about how the structure is going, how the flow and that coherence, how it's looking for each section. As always, I like your feedback. I do take notice of it to improve. You can use the QR code or this link. It's raining down here. I'm on the Gold Coast. It's just started to pour. All right, so if you could fill that out, remembering 5 is strongly agree, 1 is strongly disagree. Also, if you missed at the start, the slides are up on Blackboard. You will get an email saying that the recording, when it's ready, you'll have that link. It'll be the same link. Thank you, Maria. Thanks for coming. And as I said, still got a few more sessions for the end of the year. And actually, I think 2 of them are next week. No, it must be the week after. Sorry, yeah, 22nd and 24th of November, 2 in a week. So not sure how I ended up with that. We also have our HDR Writing peer feedback sessions. Please come along. It's a really great way for you to get feedback on your drafts. If you're using that link and it's not working for you, you need to be signed in to the system as a student. Okay, I think a lot of you are signing in the mornings when you get there with a student with a staff number. Okay, so just I'll have to talk to you if you can't get through. I'm not sure why. Oh gosh, that scared me. Sorry. Okay, our HDR Writing peer feedback sessions, there's 3 more left for the year. So please come along if you haven't tried one. It's not scary. Everybody's very supportive and we walk you through the strategies to give the best support. Also, we've got Research Career Community on Monday. That's a really good way to get some strategies around your careers. We've got Presenting Conference and Milestones next week and HDR Careers Q&A. So quite a lot on careers. And of course, so if you're not able to get onto Blackboard, you can use that link that was there. So you can see there, I can pop that actually into the so if you're having trouble to get into Blackboard, you could just go here and then go to academic communication. So it should be qt.to/gred Blackboard. Oops. All right. Okie doke. So we've still got a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions or any comments, please put it in the chat or you can unmute. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. I hope that, you know, reading through that exemplar and chatting with your peers was useful. And as always, if you've got any questions, just let me know. Thanks, everybody, saying their goodbyes. Thank you for coming. I'm really glad it was beneficial. So, yeah, that's the aim. To give you some strategies that you may not have thought of. And, you know, not all of the strategies are going to be useful all the time, but, you know, you select the ones that are useful for you, and always keep in contact with your supervisors, of course, and come to as many sessions. And as I said, those peer feedback sessions are really useful as well. So if you haven't come to one, come along. Thanks again, everyone, for coming along, and I will see you all again soon.